All right. In the middle of all of this, would you even contemplate a government shutdown or fighting over debt ceiling increase and attaching something to it? Probably unlikely now, but you never know. With the Washington Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, MacGuineas on that. Politics notwithstanding, I imagine the appetite for a government shutdown to fight for something even you feel passionate about, Maya, has just shrunk to near zero. But I could be wrong. What do you think?
You know, I think you're right on that, too. Before this hit, it seemed like shutting down the government was becoming part of the negotiating tactic, and people were stamping their feet and saying, if I don't get what I want, I'm willing to shut down the government over it. This really changes the whole equation, I think, in a way that's a massive reminder to us that when tragedies happen, when national disasters happen, that's when you need to be prepared, both fiscally and with government functioning, so that you can address them as quickly and ably as possible. So I think you're completely right that the chance of a government shutdown has shrunk to near zero, as it should. Again, I mean, I would just remind us that talking about shutting down the government as a way to negotiate, to figure out budgets, is completely irresponsible and sort of a sign of a government that's not functioning.
Well, I can certainly understand the frustration behind it, but I agree with you. I don't think it is happening either. I do wonder, though, sometimes in times like these when you want to provide aid for a region that needs it, the Sandy example comes out. Of course, Chris Christie was on with me a couple of days ago saying his fear with this sort of thing is that now it's the Texas delegation that is saying, hey, we need funding here and no one should stop it, and that's the opposite tack they took with Sandy because they were trying to stop that. But back then, a lot of them were trying to stop it is because the $60 billion in aid that was on the table, a lot of it was for other things having nothing to do with Sandy. And the fear is out of just a collective sense of guilt and wanting to do something, we're going to repeat that. So how do you do that? How do you balance heart and head here?
That's right. And so we know there will be emergencies, and we actually know how to handle them correctly. It's just that we don't always. So the first thing, is it a real emergency? This obviously is. Sandy obviously was. So it does qualify as an emergency in that we didn't know it was happening. It needs a big response. The second thing is the money or the response going to be targeted directly to the emergency? Don't load it up with a bunch of unrelated costly things that you stick into a must-pass piece of legislation.
But you know they will. You know they will.
They have in the past. They will, and those are good reasons to push back against it. You can't let that happen.
But they won't. My fear is, Maya, that they go ahead and no one is going to reject that aid, even with all these little Christmas add-ons. And that's what worries you. You want to get the aid to the people who need it here, but under that guise, then they shove in a lot of stuff you don't want, right?
Yeah, well, we've seen that certainly in the past, but we've also seen more people making a real resistance against loading it up with a bunch of unrelated items, and I very much hope that happens this time. Third, you should actually pay for emergency spending. We act as though because something's important, we shouldn't pay for it. Our debt's at near record levels. We shouldn't be borrowing more money than we already are. We should be willing to pay for this, do the emergency spending without question, but we should offset the costs. And we probably won't do that also. But I would also say all of this is a reminder why it's important to have a healthy fiscal balance sheet, which we do not in this country. So when real legitimate problems come along, we stuff them like a Christmas tree with all sorts of gifts that are unrelated. We're not willing to pay for it, and we just load up our mountain of debt higher than it already is. That's not a way to budget. And there are really important things the government needs to be doing, like helping people through this absolutely massive tragedy that they're enduring.
You know, there's a divide. I had Ken Langone, the billionaire, the co-founder of Home Depot, Maya, was saying, forget the tax cuts now. I don't need them. Of course, he's a billionaire. He doesn't need them. You could tax him at 90%. He's still richer than God. But he was saying now is not the time to entertain it. Look for the emergency relief for these people. There's another camp that says now is the exact time to consider a tax cut because, especially for those people in that neck of the woods, a little higher net pay would go a long way for them. Where do you stand on this? I'm
in a third camp, which is it was not the time for tax cuts before this, and it's not now because we are massively indebted as a country. It is the time for tax reform. Tax reform that would reorient how we raise money in a way that's more productive and would help grow the economy. But doing that in a way that actually adds to the debt will slow economic growth at a time that we need to.
Even if it doesn't, if it might short term, it might add to that, but you get some bang for the buck later. You're not in that camp, right?
No, I mean, first off, the stimulus argument, we're in the wrong part of the business cycle to be talking about the need for stimulus. Second, anybody who says tax cuts pay for themselves is unfamiliar with the real work that shows that's not even close to true. It grows the economy, but not nearly enough to pay for itself. We're not in a downturn. Do people who just went through this tragedy in Texas need some tax relief? Quite possibly. That would make sense. But that's an emergency part of the bill, helping people who are going to need to relocate. Tax reform is about how we raise money in this country, which is incredibly outdated and overly complex. Let's clean that code up, but let's do so in a way that grows the economy and doesn't add to the debt. Instead of taking the easy way out. There are a lot of people who want kind of the fiscal free lunch right now. That's not going to help the economy.